The station circled a dying blue star that burned like a cracked jewel in the dark. Its light was not steady. It flickered and pulsed as if something inside it was breaking apart. Around the star, fields of broken rock and frozen dust drifted in slow silence. In the middle of that cold emptiness floated the station, wide and round, built from layers of silver metal and thick glass. It was a place of research, trade, and careful peace between many different species. Inside the station, gravity was never simple. Each species that lived or worked there came from a different world. Some came from heavy planets where bodies were strong and thick. Some came from light moons where even small jumps sent them flying high. The station used advanced systems to adjust gravity in each section so everyone could survive. The gravity core sat at the heart of the station. It was large, quiet, and trusted. It balanced every hallway, every lab, every docking port. Without it, chaos would take over in seconds. 3 cycles before the storm, the science chamber was filled with low, worried voices. Long screens showed readings from the blue star. The numbers were changing too fast. A tall alien with pale gray skin studied the projections. His name was Varen. His species evolved under calm skies and stable land. Sudden changes were dangerous to them. His long fingers moved carefully across the display. "The star is destabilizing faster than expected," he said. Another officer, short and wide with smooth, dark scales, shifted uneasily. "The gravity waves will reach us in less than 8 hours. Gravity storms were rare. They happened when a star's core shifted violently, sending invisible waves across space. Those waves bent gravity itself. Ships caught in them were torn apart or crushed. Stations had survived small ones before. But this reading was different. Far from the science chamber, in a lower maintenance corridor, a human floated near an open panel. His boots were magnetized to the floor, but he had turned the setting low so he could move easily. His name was Daniel. He wore a simple gray work suit with oil marks on the sleeves. He did not look impressive. He was not very tall. His body was lean, built more for endurance than power. His dark hair was short and slightly messy. He hummed softly while tightening a cable inside the wall. A maintenance drone hovered beside him. "Alert," the drone said in a calm voice. "Station-wide advisory. Possible gravity instability within 8 hours." Daniel sighed and wiped his forehead. "Again?" he muttered. "This star really hates us." He closed the panel and checked his wrist display. The readings were higher than usual. He frowned, but only slightly. He had grown up on Earth, a planet that never stayed calm. Storms came without warning. The ground shook, oceans rose, snow buried cities, heat waves burned fields. Humans had built their lives in the middle of danger. They did not like it, but they knew how to endure it. Daniel pushed off lightly and drifted down the corridor toward the main lift. As he moved, the gravity shifted slightly, just enough for him to feel it in his legs. He smiled. In the central command hall, tension grew thicker with every passing minute. Officers watched the star on the main display. It pulsed brighter, then dimmer, then brighter again. Varan turned to the station commander, a broad being named Olan, whose body was supported by a floating harness. "We must prepare evacuation pods," Varan said. "If the gravity core fails, structural collapse is possible." Olan's deep voice echoed in the chamber. "Begin preparations quietly. We do not want panic." Across the station, quiet alerts appeared on personal screens. Docking ships were told to remain secured. Non-essential research was paused. Daniel stepped into the command hall without ceremony. He often came there when technical systems were involved. Some officers still looked at him with doubt. Humans were new to deep space politics. Many species saw them as reckless and fragile. "How bad is it?" Daniel asked. Varin glanced at him. "Severe. The predicted wave strength exceeds safe parameters." Daniel studied the display. Lines of data moved fast. The gravity curve was sharp and uneven. "That's not just a wave," he said quietly. "That's a punch." Olan turned toward him. "Can the gravity core endure it?" Daniel hesitated for only a second. "If it hits the way I think it will, the core will try to counter it directly." "That could overload the stabilizers?" Silence followed his words. "What do you suggest?" Varin asked. Daniel shrugged slightly. "Right now? Make sure every manual access path to the core is clear. If the system locks up, someone will need to go down there." Varin's thin eyes narrowed. The gravity shifts would be lethal. "Depends on who you send." The first sign came 2 hours early. The floor trembled gently, like distant thunder. Lights flickered once. Every officer froze. "Wave front detected," an automated voice announced. "Impact in 30 seconds. Across the station, beings hurried to secure stations." Some species lowered themselves into protective frames. Others injected stabilizing fluids into their systems. Daniel stood in the command hall and stretched his shoulders. "You look calm," Varin said. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Back home, we call this Tuesday." The entire station groaned as if struck by a giant hand. Gravity surged. It doubled in less than a second. Several officers collapsed to their knees. Consoles cracked under sudden weight. A tall technician cried out as his harness strained. Daniel's boots slammed hard against the floor. His knees bent deeply. His arms tightened at his sides. The pressure pushed down on him like a heavy truck. His teeth clenched, but he did not fall. Then the gravity dropped. The command hall lurched as if the floor had vanished. Bodies lifted. Papers and tools floated wildly. An officer drifted into the air and struck the ceiling. Daniel pushed off a console and grabbed a support rail. Alarms screamed. "Gravity stabilizers failing in sectors 4 through 9, the automated voice reported. This time the surge was stronger. Triple normal gravity crushed down. A sharp cracking sound echoed as part of a console snapped. Varin collapsed flat, unable to move under the weight. His species was not built for sudden force. His breathing became shallow. Daniel moved through the heavy pressure step by step. Each movement looked painful but steady. He reached Varin and pulled him toward a reinforced support column. "Stay low," Daniel said. "Spread your weight." The gravity dropped again without warning. Both of them lifted slightly, but Daniel kept one hand locked around the column. He laughed once under his breath. "Feels like home," he said. Varin stared at him in disbelief. Across the station, chaos spread. In laboratory sectors, fragile equipment shattered. In docking bays, ships groaned against their clamps. Several species lost consciousness during the rapid shifts. In the lower decks, a cargo container broke free and slammed into a wall as gravity changed direction for half a second. Back in command, Olan struggled to remain upright in his harness. "Report," he demanded. "Gravity core output unstable," came the reply from engineering. "The system is attempting full counterforce. It cannot maintain balance."
"It's fighting the wave," he said. "That's the problem." Another violent surge hit.
This one was stronger than the first. The floor cracked in a thin line across the chamber. Emergency red lights flashed. "Primary stabilizer ring failure," the automated voice announced. Varen forced himself to speak despite the pressure.
"We must seal the core before it explodes." Daniel shook his head. "If you seal it now, you lose gravity control completely."
"This whole station turns into a death trap."
Olan looked between them.
"What is your solution, human?"
he asked. Daniel wiped sweat from his face. "I need access to the core chamber. Manual override." Varen's voice rose. "Impossible. The gravity levels inside will exceed survival limits." "For you?" he said. The station shook again, harder than before. A section of the ceiling collapsed at the far end of the hall. Through the main display, the blue star flared bright white for a moment. "A second wave building," the science officer shouted. The readings climbed higher than before. Olan made his decision. "Clear the path to the gravity core. Grant manual access to the human engineer." Several officers protested, but another violent shift silenced them. Daniel nodded once. "Keep communications open," he said, "and strap yourselves down. This is just the beginning." He moved toward the exit as gravity slammed down again, heavier than any before. The floor dented under the force. Behind him, Varen watched with wide eyes as the human walked into the shaking corridor. For the first time, the alien officers understood something simple and frightening. The storm was not over, and the only one who seemed ready for it was the human who said it felt like home. Daniel moved quickly through the station, each step a battle against the shifting gravity. The halls that once felt normal now twisted and tilted. Metal supports groaned. Overhead lights flickered, sending shadows dancing across walls that seemed to move with the storm. The smell of heated machinery and ozone filled the air. He had no time to hesitate. Every second mattered. The gravity core was at the center of the chaos, and if it failed, the station would collapse. He passed the first gravity stabilization sector. The doors had warped under the strain, swinging with the force of the storm. He grabbed a handle and pulled himself forward, feeling the sudden weight shift crush him against the wall. His legs shook, his chest pressed tight, but he kept moving. He reminded himself that humans were built for extremes. He had lived through earthquakes, hurricanes, and blizzards on Earth. Surviving was instinct. A loud crash echoed from the floor above, followed by a series of smaller explosions. Daniel knew the auxiliary systems were failing. He needed to reach the core chamber before the main stabilizers overloaded completely. An alien technician ran toward him, floating lightly despite the chaos. Her name was Lyra. Her species could only survive under light gravity, and she struggled with the heavy shifts. "Daniel, you can't go alone," she called, her voice strained. Daniel glanced at her. "I have to. If I don't reach it now, the whole station will be lost." He pushed off the wall, moving faster. Lyra followed as best she could, using the handrails for support. Corridors twisted unexpectedly, sometimes pulling them down, other times sending them floating uncontrollably toward the ceiling. The walls themselves seemed alive, bending with the changing gravity. They reached a junction where several passageways converged. A steel panel had been ripped from the wall and blocked the main route. Daniel gritted his teeth. He lifted it with a surge of strength, feeling his muscles burn. The metal fell to the floor with a deafening clang. Lyra clung to a rail to avoid being thrown backward. "Almost there," Daniel muttered, moving ahead. He could hear the alarms from the gravity core chamber growing louder. The station's central nervous system was crying out for help. He reached the maintenance elevator, but the doors had jammed under the stress of the storm. He leaned against them and pushed with all his weight, straining against the shifting forces. Slowly, the doors creaked open, and he entered the elevator shaft. Inside, he clung to the rail as the elevator plummeted and rose unpredictably with the gravity waves. Each movement threatened to throw him against the walls. Lyra followed, her small frame barely able to cope with the sudden shifts. She gasped, her lungs straining under the heavy gravity spikes. When the elevator reached the core level, the doors opened to reveal a chaos of metal and sparks. The chamber was dimly lit, the primary stabilizer glowing dangerously red. Small fires flickered along walls and floors. Gravity shifted violently, throwing loose cables and debris across the room. Daniel swallowed hard. He had faced dangers before, but the scene before him was beyond imagination. He anchored himself to a thick support beam and took a moment to assess. The gravity core was a massive structure of interlocking rings and panels. Its main console, normally sleek and orderly, was bent and cracked. Sparks jumped from exposed circuits. Warning lights blinked erratically. He had to act fast. "Daniel, be careful!" Lyra shouted from behind, holding onto a rail. Her small hands trembled.
"It's too dangerous!" Daniel ignored the warning. He reached the console and tried to access the manual override panel.
The surface was warped, and the buttons resisted his touch. The gravity surged again, pressing him down and then sending him sliding across the floor. He grabbed a handhold and yanked himself back. He remembered his training. On Earth, humans often faced natural forces beyond their control. In those moments, improvisation was necessary. He applied the same mindset here. One by one, he undid the damaged safety locks and exposed the manual control interface. His hands moved quickly, despite the shaking. Every wire, every button, every lever had to be adjusted just right. Meanwhile, alarms blared across the station. The alien crew monitoring the gravity readouts could only watch in horror. They had never seen a human handle such extreme conditions. Their own species would have been crushed or flung across the room. Daniel's calm precision was unbelievable. A sudden surge sent a metal rod flying. It struck the floor inches from him, sending sparks everywhere. Daniel ducked instinctively and continued working. Lyra tried to assist, her small fingers pressing what controls she could reach. She was terrified but inspired by his bravery. I've never seen anyone survive like this," she admitted, shouting over the alarms. Daniel didn't answer. He focused entirely on the manual overrides. The station's sensors were giving inconsistent readings, but he knew enough to stabilize the primary ring temporarily. It wouldn't hold for long, but it would buy time. Suddenly, the gravity spiked again, harder than before. Daniel was pinned to the floor, struggling to breathe. His hands were trembling from the pressure, but he refused to give up. Lyra clutched a rail and screamed as the floor shifted beneath her, but Daniel managed to pull her to a secure spot. "This is going to get worse," Daniel muttered under his breath. "Stay ready." Outside the chamber, the alien commander and other officers watched the Corps' status. They had given up hope of intervening directly. Their eyes widened as they saw life signs remain steady inside the chamber. They could not understand how Daniel was surviving. The station's lights flickered again. Sparks and small fires erupted along the core walls. Metal beams groaned under strain. Daniel adjusted the manual overrides, feeling the system respond. The surges became less chaotic, but the core was still unstable. Another massive spike hit, doubling the gravity for a moment. Daniel felt his bones ache, but he clung to the console, using every ounce of strength to maintain control. Lyra shouted warnings as objects slammed against walls, but he kept his focus. Minutes passed like hours. The storm outside showed no signs of slowing. Daniel worked tirelessly, adjusting the interface, redirecting energy and stabilizing circuits. Every movement was calculated. Every decision mattered. If he failed, the station would collapse. The core's output began to level slightly. The alarms decreased in intensity. The violent swings of gravity became less unpredictable. Daniel allowed himself a brief breath. Partial stabilization, he muttered. We can hold for now. Lyra looked at him in awe.
You saved this section.
I thought we would all be lost. Daniel gave a tired smile. It's not over yet. The storm is stronger than I thought. We'll need every trick we have to survive the next wave. He knew the station's systems were only temporarily stabilized. The gravity storm outside continued to rise. The blue star flared again, sending a pulse across space. The next surge would be worse. He looked around the chamber, seeing twisted metal, sparks, and fires, but there was still hope. The station could survive if they were careful. And as he looked at the trembling but determined Lyra, he realized the human ability to endure extremes gave them a chance no other species had. He spoke quietly, almost to himself.
Feels like home.
Outside the court chamber, the aliens watched in disbelief. They had always believed humans were weak. Now they understood something they could not ignore. The human was not just surviving. He was shaping the fate of the station with sheer resilience and will. The storm would not wait. Another surge was building, and Daniel, the human engineer, prepared to meet it head-on, knowing that the safety of hundreds depended on his endurance and quick thinking. The station's future, for all species aboard, rested on the ability of one human to stand firm when everything else seemed impossible. Daniel was deep inside the gravity core chamber, the heat from the fires brushing against his face. Sparks danced along twisted metal, and the floor was littered with broken machinery. The gravity surged violently, swinging from crushing force to near weightlessness within seconds. Each movement required all his strength and focus. He could feel his muscles tearing, his lungs burning. Yet, he continued. Every second counted. The manual override panel glowed faintly under his hands. The buttons were warped, some barely readable. He worked quickly, rerouting circuits and stabilizing circuits as best as he could. Outside the chamber, the alarms screamed, warning of critical system failure. The other crew members could only watch from monitors, paralyzed by fear. Suddenly, a massive surge hit. Daniel was thrown across the room. He slammed against a steel support beam, the impact knocking the wind out of him. Pain shot through his body, but he gritted his teeth and pushed himself back to the panel. He could not stop. Lives depended on his actions. A flickering holographic display showed the core's status. The main stabilizer ring was failing rapidly. If it collapsed, the entire station would be crushed. Daniel's mind raced. He remembered his training on Earth. Humans learned to adapt to disaster. They did not fight nature directly. They worked with it, bending and flowing instead of resisting. He adjusted the energy flows, rerouted power to auxiliary stabilizers, and held onto a support beam as another violent surge shook the chamber. Lyra clung to a rail beside him, her small body trembling under the pressure. Her species was not built for this chaos, but she refused to leave his side. Daniel noticed her courage and felt a small spark of hope. "Keep an eye on the readings," he shouted over the alarms. "We can't let this core go." Outside, Varen and Olin watched the monitors in disbelief. The human inside was defying every expectation. He should have been crushed, yet his life signs remained steady. The alien crew had never seen anything like it. They had always believed that only their species could handle complex engineering under stable conditions. Now, they understood how wrong they were. A sudden flash of light illuminated the chamber. The blue star flared violently, sending a massive gravity wave toward the station. Daniel braced himself, feeling the force pressing into the floor. Loose cables wrapped around his arms, sparks flying as they struck metal. He moved them aside and continued adjusting the manual controls. The wave passed, leaving the chamber in momentary calm. Daniel gasped for breath, feeling his ribs ache. But the moment of calm was brief. Another surge approached, stronger than the last. He could see the lights on the stabilizer panels blinking red, warning of imminent overload. Daniel's mind raced. He remembered stories from Earth of humans surviving impossible conditions. Mountains, storms, floods, earthquakes. They had all been endured through resilience and quick thinking. He realized that the station needed the same approach. Fighting the storm directly was futile. He needed to work with it. He began to synchronize the auxiliary stabilizers with the incoming wave, adjusting the timing so that each pulse of energy would counteract the peak of the gravity surge, rather than resist it. Lyra followed his instructions, pressing controls with trembling hands. The system responded slightly, the surges becoming less violent. The chamber groaned as metal bent and twisted, but the collapse slowed. Minutes passed in tense silence, broken only by alarms and the groaning of stressed metal. Daniel worked tirelessly, moving from panel to panel, rerouting energy and stabilizing circuits. His body ached, but he refused to give up. Outside, the alien crew watched in amazement as the core's energy flows began to stabilize. Then, a new danger appeared. A support beam, twisted from the constant strain, began to collapse. Daniel saw it in time and threw himself to the side, narrowly avoiding being crushed. The beam slammed into the floor, sending sparks and debris flying. Lyra screamed, but managed to hold onto a rail. Daniel ignored the pain in his body. He continued adjusting the controls, knowing that one mistake could doom the station. The gravity core responded slowly, the red warning lights shifting to yellow. It was not perfect, but it was enough to hold for the moment. Another surge hit, this one massive. The chamber shook violently, and Daniel was thrown to the floor again. He clutched the control panel, using every ounce of strength to keep it steady. Lyra pressed her hands against the panel, trying to help. Together they managed to keep the core from total collapse. Outside, the alien officers watched in stunned silence. They had never seen anything like this. A human, seemingly fragile, was holding a station together in conditions that would have killed any of them. It was a revelation. Daniel took a deep breath, his body trembling with exhaustion. He glanced at the core's status. The stabilizers were holding, but only just. The next surge could be catastrophic. He knew he needed a new plan. He remembered the human ability to adapt, to improvise under pressure. On Earth, humans did not wait for disasters to end. They moved with them, using the forces around them to survive. Daniel realized that the station needed the same approach. He began to adjust the core's output, not to resist the storm, but to flow with it. Each pulse of energy was timed to match the incoming gravity waves, reducing their impact rather than fighting them directly. The chamber responded. The surges became less violent, the lights stabilizing slightly. Lyra looked at him with wide eyes, her fear mingled with awe. I didn't think this was possible, she whispered. Daniel nodded, too focused to respond fully. He continued his work, every movement calculated, every decision critical. The station groaned and shuddered, but it held together. The humans' quick thinking and endurance were making the impossible possible. Minutes stretched into hours as Daniel and Lyra worked side by side. The gravity storm outside continued, relentless and powerful. But inside the core chamber, a fragile balance was forming. The station's systems, guided by the humans' ingenuity, were beginning to adapt to the chaos. Finally, a moment of relative calm. The alarms dimmed slightly, and the lights flickered steadily instead of erratically. Daniel allowed himself a brief breath, though his body ached from the strain. He had held the core together. For now? Outside, the alien crew looked on in astonishment. The human had not only survived, but had kept the station alive. They had underestimated him, assuming his species was weak and fragile. Now they understood the truth. Humans were resilient, capable of enduring extremes that others could not imagine. Daniel stood, supporting himself on the console. He glanced at Lyra, who nodded in quiet respect. Together, they had held the core through the worst of the storm, but Daniel knew the battle was not over. The storm was far from finished, and the station remained in danger. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. "Feels like home." The words echoed through the chamber, a testament to human endurance. The gravity storm raged outside, but inside, a human had shown that survival was possible through courage, quick thinking, and an unbreakable will. The station, battered and scarred, had survived another round, and Daniel prepared himself for the next challenge, knowing that the true test of endurance was yet to come. Daniel lay against the cool metal of the core chamber, exhausted but alert. His muscles burned and his ribs ached from the repeated surges, yet he refused to rest. Every fiber of his being was focused on keeping the station alive. Lyra, pale and trembling, clung to a handrail nearby, her eyes never leaving him. The alien crew outside monitored his vital signs, amazed at the endurance that kept a human alive in conditions that would have crushed them. The blue star outside flared again, sending a pulse that rippled across space. The station shuddered as gravity shifted violently once more. Daniel braced himself, feeling the crushing force push him into the floor, then lifting him into near weightlessness. Sparks flew from exposed circuits, and twisted metal groaned under strain. Every movement required planning. Every breath was a challenge. He pressed himself against the manual override panel, ignoring the pain in his body. The stabilizers were holding, but only barely. Another surge, even stronger than the last, was approaching. Daniel's mind raced. He had to find a way to keep the station from collapsing completely. "Lyra, monitor the auxiliary circuits," he shouted. "We need to keep the energy flowing to the main stabilizer. Don't let anything drop below threshold." Lyra nodded, fumbling with controls while trying to steady herself. "You can," Daniel said firmly. "Focus on what you can control. That's all that matters." Outside, Varen and Olin watched the core chamber on monitors, their expressions a mix of fear and awe. They had thought the human would fail, that the station was doomed. Now they could see that he was holding the station together, step by step, despite the impossible conditions. Their previous assumptions about human fragility were shattered. Inside the chamber, another violent surge hit. Daniel was thrown sideways, crashing into a console. Pain shot through his ribs, but he grabbed a nearby rail and pulled himself back. The panel was alive with flashing lights and sparks. He adjusted the energy flow, rerouted power from damaged circuits, and held the stabilizers just within operational limits. "Almost there," he muttered, his voice low and steady. "We can hold this, but just for a little while." A loud crack echoed as a support beam twisted dangerously. Debris fell around them. Daniel used the momentary lull to reposition Lyra behind a reinforced column. The young alien was terrified but determined. She glanced at him with wide eyes, silently asking if they would survive. Daniel gave a small, reassuring nod. The core systems shuddered again as the next surge approached. Daniel adjusted the timing of the auxiliary stabilizers, synchronizing their pulses with the incoming gravity waves. He worked with the storm, not against it, using each wave to relieve pressure instead of resisting it. The technique was risky, but it worked. The chamber's violent shaking lessened slightly, giving them a brief moment of stability. Minutes stretched, each one an eternity. Daniel moved methodically, adjusting circuits, redirecting power, and securing loose components. Sparks jumped from damaged panels, the acrid smell of ozone filling the air. Lyra assisted where she could, pressing buttons and flipping switches as instructed. The bond between them, forged in extreme conditions, strengthened with each passing moment. Another massive surge hit, stronger than any before. Daniel was pressed into the floor, his chest aching under the immense pressure. Lyra screamed as the room tilted violently. Metal beams groaned and loose equipment clattered across the chamber. Daniel clutched the console, using every ounce of strength to maintain control. He focused on the timing of the stabilizers, holding the core in balance despite the chaos. Outside, the alien crew watched in stunned silence. They had always believed humans were weak, unable to endure extreme conditions. Now, they saw the truth. Daniel was defying every expectation, demonstrating resilience and ingenuity that no other species could match. The surge passed, leaving the chamber in a brief calm. Daniel gasped, feeling the ache in his body. He glanced at the core's status, noting that the stabilizers were still holding, though strained. The storm was relentless, and the next wave would be even stronger. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. "Feels like home." The words echoed through the chamber, a testament to human endurance. Lyra looked at him with admiration and fear. She had witnessed something extraordinary, a human surviving the impossible and keeping a station alive. Daniel's mind raced. The station's systems were fragile, and the storm was building in intensity. He realized that surviving the next surge would require a new approach. Humans did not fight disasters directly. They adapted, using the forces around them to their advantage. He needed to synchronize the station's systems with the storm, flowing with the gravity waves rather than resisting them. He began adjusting the stabilizers, timing each pulse to match the incoming surges. Lyra assisted, her hands steady now despite the chaos. The chamber responded, the violent shaking lessening as the core began to move with the storm rather than against it. Sparks still flew and metal groaned, but the collapse slowed. Hours passed in tense silence. Daniel and Lyra worked tirelessly, moving from panel to panel, rerouting energy and stabilizing circuits. The gravity storm outside showed no mercy, but inside the chamber, a fragile balance was forming. The station, battered and scarred, was beginning to survive. Finally, a moment of relative calm. The alarms dimmed slightly, and the lights flickered steadily. Daniel allowed himself a brief breath, though his body screamed with exhaustion. He had held the core together, for now. Outside, the alien crew looked on in astonishment. The human had not only survived, but had kept the station alive. They had underestimated him, assuming his species was weak and fragile. Now they understood the truth. Humans were resilient, capable of enduring extremes that others could not imagine. Daniel stood, supporting himself on the console. He glanced at Lyra, who nodded in quiet respect. Together they had held the core through the worst of the storm, but Daniel knew the battle was not over. The storm was far from finished, and the station remained in danger. He prepared himself for the next surge, knowing that the true test of endurance was yet to come. The station's survival depended on his courage, quick thinking, and unbreakable will. He had faced the impossible and lived. Now he would face it again, ready to prove that humanity could endure even the most relentless of storms. Daniel surveyed the core chamber, sweat dripping down his face, and his muscles trembling from hours of strain. The gravity storm outside was building with relentless force. Each surge pushed the station to its limits, and the stabilizers groaned under the pressure. Sparks flew from damaged panels, sending tiny arcs of electricity into the air. The room smelled of ozone and heated metal. Every sense told him that time was running out. He glanced at Lyra, who was still clinging to a rail, her hands shaking but her eyes focused. She had never seen anything like this, and yet she stayed beside him, assisting wherever she could. Her determination inspired Daniel even in the face of overwhelming danger. "Lyra," he said, voice strained but firm, "we can't keep resisting the storm. It's too strong. If we fight it directly, we'll fail."
"We need to work with it." Lyra looked confused.
"With it? How? The surges are destroying everything." Daniel nodded. "Exactly. But we don't need to stop it. We need to flow with it. Let the station ride the waves instead of fighting them." He began adjusting the core's output, timing each stabilizer pulse to match the incoming gravity waves. It was delicate work. A single miscalculation could overload the system and collapse the station. He worked methodically, moving from panel to panel, rerouting power and synchronizing the pulses. Lyra assisted, pressing switches and flipping levers as instructed. The chamber shook violently with the next surge. Sparks flew as metal groaned and twisted. Daniel held his position, arms straining against the force, eyes focused on the fluctuating energy readings. The auxiliary stabilizers responded to his adjustments, pulsing in rhythm with the storm. The violent shaking lessened slightly, giving them a brief moment of stability. Outside the chamber, the alien crew watched the monitors in stunned silence. They had never seen a human operate under such extreme conditions. Their species would have been crushed long ago. Daniel's calm precision and endurance were astonishing. "Look at him," whispered Varan. "He's surviving." Olan, the station commander, nodded slowly. "He's not just surviving. He's controlling it." Inside the chamber, Daniel continued his work. Another surge approached, stronger than the last. He braced himself, feeling the crushing force push him to the floor, then lift him into near weightlessness. Sparks flew from exposed circuits, and debris rattled around them. Lyra pressed herself against a rail, trying to maintain balance. "Steady," Daniel muttered. "Focus on timing. Flow with it." He adjusted the stabilizers, synchronizing each pulse with the storm's rhythm. The chamber responded, the violent shaking lessening as the core moved with the waves rather than against them. Sparks still flew, and metal groaned, but the collapse slowed. Lyra followed his instructions, her hands steady now despite the chaos. Minutes passed in tense silence. Daniel moved methodically, adjusting circuits, rerouting power, and securing loose components. The gravity storm outside showed no mercy. But inside the chamber, a fragile balance was forming. The station, battered and scarred, was beginning to survive. Another massive surge hit, stronger than any before. Daniel was pressed into the floor, chest aching under the immense pressure. Lyra screamed as the room tilted violently, but Daniel held the console, using every ounce of strength to maintain control. The timing of the stabilizers worked. The core held, and the station did not collapse. The alien crew outside watched in disbelief. They had always believed humans were weak, unable to endure extreme conditions. Now they saw the truth. Daniel was defying every expectation, demonstrating resilience and ingenuity that no other species could match. Daniel took a deep breath, body trembling. He glanced at the core's status. The stabilizers were holding, but only just. Another surge was imminent. He knew he needed to be faster and more precise. Humans had survived on Earth by adapting to disasters, using the forces around them instead of fighting them directly. He applied the same principle here. He began rerouting more energy to the auxiliary stabilizers, timing each pulse to anticipate the next wave. Lyra assisted, moving quickly and confidently under his guidance. The chamber responded, the violent shaking reducing even further. Sparks still flew, and metal creaked, but the collapse was avoided. Daniel and Lyra worked tirelessly. The gravity storm outside remained relentless, but inside the core chamber the station was holding. The humans' quick thinking and endurance were making the impossible possible. Finally, a moment of calm. The alarms dimmed slightly, and the lights flickered steadily. Daniel allowed himself a brief breath, though his body ached. He had kept the station alive through the worst of the storm. Outside, the alien crew watched in astonishment. The human had not only survived, but had kept the station intact. They had underestimated him, assuming his species was fragile. Now they understood the truth. Humans were resilient, capable of enduring extremes that others could not imagine. Daniel stood, supporting himself on the console. He glanced at Lyra, who nodded in quiet respect. Together, they had held the core through the worst of the storm. But Daniel knew the battle was not over. The storm was far from finished, and the station remained in danger. He prepared himself for the next surge, knowing that the true test of endurance was yet to come. The station's survival depended on his courage, quick thinking, and unbreakable will. He had faced the impossible and lived. Now he would face it again, ready to prove that humanity could endure even the most relentless of storms. The blue star blazed fiercely outside the station, its surface tossing waves of gravitational energy that reached the station in violent pulses. The entire station shuddered under the force. Inside the gravity core chamber, Daniel braced himself against the control console, sweat dripping from his face, muscles trembling from the previous hours of struggle. He could feel every shift of gravity, every vibration of metal, every surge of energy through the structure. Each wave was stronger than the last, testing the limits of the station and of his body. Lyra held onto a rail nearby, her hands trembling. She was exhausted, but she did not move away. Her species could not endure such shifts for long, yet she stayed beside Daniel, following his instructions without hesitation. They had grown into a rhythm together, navigating chaos in ways the station's automated systems could not. "Another one's coming," Daniel said, voice steady despite the strain. "We have to ride it, not fight it. Time to move with the wave. He adjusted the manual overrides, synchronizing the core's stabilizers with the incoming surge. Every pulse of energy was timed to counteract the peak of the gravity wave, rather than resist it directly. Sparks flew from twisted panels, and debris shifted under the chaotic forces. The chamber shuddered violently, but Daniel maintained his focus, guiding the stabilizers like a musician controlling a complex symphony. Outside, Varen and Olan monitored the station, eyes wide in astonishment. The human inside the core chamber was surviving conditions that would have instantly incapacitated any of their species. They had underestimated humans, assuming fragility where resilience now shone through. Daniel's calm precision and endurance held the station together, pulse by pulse, wave by wave. The next surge hit, stronger than any before. Daniel's body was pressed into the floor, ribs aching, lungs straining under the extreme pressure. Sparks flew from exposed circuits, flames flickered along damaged conduits, and twisted metal groaned under the force. Lyra cried out, struggling to hold herself in place. "Steady!" Daniel shouted, using every ounce of strength to control the console. "Ride it with me!" The chamber responded to his adjustments. The violent shaking lessened as the stabilizers moved in harmony with the gravity wave. Metal groaned and panels twisted, but the collapse slowed. Lyra followed his instructions, pressing switches and flipping levers with trembling hands. Together, they held the core intact. Hours passed in tense silence. Daniel moved methodically, rerouting power, adjusting circuits, and timing stabilizer pulses with precision. The gravity storm outside remained relentless, but inside the chamber, a fragile balance had formed. The station, battered and scarred, was beginning to endure. Finally, a temporary calm arrived. The alarms dimmed and the lights stabilized. Daniel allowed himself a brief breath, muscles trembling but still functional. He had kept the station alive through the most extreme waves yet. Lyra looked at him with awe and fear, understanding now that human endurance and ingenuity were beyond what they had imagined. You actually did it," Lyra whispered. "The station, it's holding. Not done yet. One final wave is coming, stronger than the rest.
We need to hold it together and survive." The blue star blazed, casting waves of white light into the chamber.
The gravity surge approached with overwhelming force. Daniel braced himself, adjusting the stabilizers with precise timing. Each pulse of energy synchronized with the approaching wave. Lyra followed his instructions, her hands steady despite exhaustion. The surge hit. The chamber was crushed by gravity, then lifted into near weightlessness, swinging violently from one extreme to the next. Sparks flew everywhere, flames flickered along panels, and twisted metal creaked and groaned under pressure. Daniel held the console, muscles burning, sweat blinding his eyes. Lyra clung to a rail beside him, keeping herself from being thrown across the room. Daniel adjusted each stabilizer pulse, flowing with the wave instead of resisting it. The violent shifts lessened. The chamber responded, the station bending with the surge rather than breaking. Metal groaned and sparks flew, but collapse was avoided. Step by step, pulse by pulse, wave by wave, they kept the station intact. Outside, the alien crew watched in silent awe. They had believed humans were fragile, incapable of surviving such extreme conditions. Now, they understood. Daniel, a single human, had kept a station alive against a cosmic force that would have destroyed any other species. They had underestimated human resilience. The wave passed. The chamber shook, then steadied. The stabilizers held. Daniel collapsed briefly against the console, breathing heavily, every muscle aching. Lyra leaned against a support beam, exhausted but alive. The station was safe, for now. Daniel stood slowly, surveying the room. Sparks still flew from damaged circuits, and metal groaned under strain, but the core was stable. The worst of the storm had passed. Outside, the alien crew moved cautiously into the chamber, their eyes wide. They had watched in disbelief as a human survived and controlled forces that would have killed any of them. Varan approached Daniel, stepping lightly over debris. "How? How did you endure this?" he asked. Daniel wiped sweat from his face. "On Earth, storms come, earthquakes, hurricanes, floods. People survive by adapting, by moving with the forces around them instead of fighting directly. Humans learn to endure extremes. That's what we did here." The crew stared at him, understanding dawning. They had believed humans weak, fragile. Now they saw the truth. Humanity thrived where others feared to tread. Resilience, endurance, and adaptability were their strengths. Olan nodded slowly, his expression somber. "We need more humans for deep space missions," he said. "Their ability to survive the impossible is unmatched." He looked around the chamber, at the scorched panels and twisted metal, and felt a sense of home amidst the chaos. The station had survived. The crew had survived. Humanity had proven itself once again. He spoke softly, more to himself than anyone else. "Feels like home." The words echoed in the chamber, a testament to human endurance. Outside, the blue star continued to blaze, but the station floated intact, battered but unbroken. The alien crew realized that in a galaxy built on stability, humans were the masters of chaos. Thriving where others would falter, the station's lights stabilized fully, the alarms quieted. Daniel and Lyra took a moment to rest, leaning against support beams, bodies trembling from exhaustion. They had faced the impossible and survived. The gravity storm had tested them, pushed them to the edge. Yet they endured. The future was uncertain. Other storms would come, other challenges would arise. But now, every crew member knew the truth. Humans were not fragile. They were shaped by chaos, molded to survive, and able to face the impossible with courage and ingenuity. And as Daniel looked out the reinforced windows at the blazing blue star, he felt a strange comfort amidst the destruction. Against all odds, against all reason, the station had survived. And in that survival, he recognized something deeply familiar. The chaos of space, the relentless forces, the pressure that would have crushed others. Here, humans thrived. Here, they were at home.